are you buying the right licensing for those systems? And there may be cost saving. And I think more importantly is ensuring that you have multi-factor authentication set up on all your accounts. So having that hardware lifecycle, knowing that you're going to be replacing a certain number of them every year. End of year is a good time to order them, especially if you have leftover budget or availability of hardware, or you want some Section 179 write-offs for your taxes.
You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I'm Sherry Lip, the marketing manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I'm here with Nathan, CEO of Stimulus Technologies, and we are going to be doing part one of a series on wrapping up and assessing your technology for the end of the year. As hard as it is to say, we are moving into the last quarter of the year, and we need to start thinking about 2026. Welcome, Nathan.
Why is it almost the last quarter of the year? So much left to do in 2025, but I think we do need to be talking about 26. So good topic to bring up.
Winter time when it's sunny and 90 degrees here in Las Vegas, but it will cool off soon, hopefully.
Yeah, usually what about Halloween? It
Mhm.
flips. I just remember as a kid, didn't know if I was just going to be wearing my costume or costume with a coat. And when I was in Salt Lake City earlier in my life, it was like full on parka sometimes at
Yes.
Halloween. So
Yeah, in Seattle, it was sometimes a raincoat. All right, so why is this time of the year, why is it so important to take a look at our technology?
well, I think a lot of companies are doing a couple of things at the end of the year. They may be doing some tax planning for that current year. Looking at what investments they could potentially make inside their business. If they had some profit that they, want to make some immediate investments and take Section 179 tax advantages or just, regular depreciation on equipment. So, whether it's buying vehicles or upgrading hardware inside their companies or, buildings, buying computer hardware is a good option because we need to upgrade systems periodically. If you're not doing it this year, maybe planning out what needs to happen in the budget for next year, because a lot of companies are looking at their 2026 budgeting and what they need to do over the following year from a IT standpoint. So I think it's a good time to look at all systems inside your company. Um, at Stimulus, we use the EOS system to run our business, and so we have a scheduled planning session for our quarterly and annual planning, and it's really a good time to also bring in your IT consultants and look at where you're at and what improvements you need to make from a technology standpoint.
Well, what kind of things should businesses be looking at? We'll start with, their systems, like when it comes to former employees and what kind of accounts they have set up.
Yeah, we were just talking about this recently is one of the biggest security concerns is accounts that are no longer valid and ensuring that all the accounts on all the systems that you have are current employees and that everything is valid for login. So I would say, part of this year-end audit is to get a list of logins, not just for your computer systems like Microsoft 365, but look at VPNs, look at cloud applications, look at line of business applications. Um, one of the things to look at as part of that is are you buying the right licensing for those systems? And there may be cost savings if started out the year with 70 employees or 100 employees or 20 employees and now you have three or four less. You might be able to save monthly costs on licensing if you can eliminate those licenses. Additionally, it's a huge security risk if you do have accounts that are no longer valid. There are employees that have left, and you want to eliminate those ghost accounts. Also, look at vendors. A lot of times we'll have vendors that'll come in. You'll set up an account for them to access your systems, maybe an auditor, maybe a CPA, maybe an outside consultant. And you don't have a contract with that vendor anymore. So making sure that you're eliminating those logins too at the same time. So it's a good time to just look through all the accounts and all the systems, not just your 365 accounts, but every system you have a login for. See if you can eliminate some licenses, but also ensure that you don't have that security risk of these old accounts hanging out.
Yeah, and we did a episode a little while ago about, unnecessary subscriptions or subscriptions that are redundant and stuff like that and overspending. And I was going to say at the beginning, if you're a regular listener, thank you, but some of this might be repetition because we need to say it, and because repetition is how things become solid. And when you're only looking at things once a year, it's hard for things to become solid. So some of these things you might have heard before, and some, but for a lot of you, it will be new info. So how? Because I was gonna move into passwords. We've talked a lot about passwords, but is this a good time to look for if people are using the same password or sharing passwords?
Yeah, I think having a password manager is a great opportunity to scan for these passwords and ensure that um, from your employee standpoint, that they're not duplicating passwords among multiple sites, but also those shared passwords or logins that have been inactive for a while. And I think more importantly is ensuring that you have multi-factor authentication set up on all your accounts. So, obviously Microsoft 365 or your Google email, bank accounts, those are really essential. But on top of that, look at any other line of business applications or logins to important websites, even like a login to Amazon.com if you're using a corporate account, could be a security violation. Credit card processors or even credit card logins, bank logins. A lot of times those require, the same username and password to be used among your accounting staff and maybe the executive. Unfortunately, they don't allow those multiple logins, and it's a good time to audit those and maybe reset passwords or ensure that they have enough security on them. So great time to convert to a password manager if you don't already have one. And Stimulus is here to help you do that. But there's plenty of great password managers, and I know that we have episodes about them out there you can listen to.
And somebody told me a story recently where maybe like evaluating logins where their Facebook got compromised because the employee using it had their personal account attached to the company account, which is a lot of times what you have to do to manage a business page. And theirs got compromised, which led the person into their advertising, into the business suite where they got the credit card that was hooked to advertising. So it definitely could be a good time to review how things are logged into and what's attached to what.
Yeah, for sure. There's especially when you're dealing with social media, that's a really good point. That that is a concern. There's a bit of a mix of business and personal there, and businesses need to be aware of that mix. It's an unfortunate part of some of those accounts and some of those providers, whether it's social media providers or even credit card providers. They often only allow for one login, and I hate sharing passwords, but that's another backdoor through another personal account into a corporate account. That's kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah, definitely. And it was a former employee. You know how Facebook, if somebody hasn't logged into it for a long time, it's the easiest, one of the biggest hacks. So it's important to know. It's important to remove employees from those accounts that you might not think of. So let's move on to hardware. How do you recommend evaluating hardware at the end of the year?
So in the book, the CEO's Digital Survival Guide, we lay out a plan for managing your hardware across your network. You know, as I mentioned before, the year end might be a good time to replace hardware, but you need to know age of hardware too, and having a good defined hardware life cycle is important for the business. So we recommend, desktops and laptops have a life cycle of somewhere between 3 and 5 years, just because there's a lot more wear and tear, especially on laptops. And as they age, the systems slow down quite a bit and frustrate users. Um, so having that hardware life cycle, knowing that you're going to be replacing a certain number of them every year, End of year is a good time to order them, especially if you have leftover budget or availability of hardware, or you want some Section 179 write-offs for your taxes. You can do that. Servers, we recommend somewhere between 5 and 7 year replacements. As long as you can continue getting warranty on the servers, usually that time frame works. Might be a good time to look at the warranties on your servers. And don't forget about networking equipment, your firewalls, network switches, things like that. Those also need updates and they get end of life also. And having a firewall in your office that doesn't have the latest version of security software on there can be a big vulnerability. So talk to your IT provider, making sure that they're looking at that. And then there's a current subscription on your firewall with your security patches. So it's comprehensive. At Stimulus, we quarterly, we work with our clients, bring a hardware report, show them where they're at so they can budget for those replacements well in advance. But right now, end of year is a good time to look at that and see where your equipment's aging and maybe replace a few of your machines before the end of the year. Especially by the time this podcast is out, we'll be right around the deadline of Windows 10 expiration. So we want to make sure that if you have any equipment that is not capable of being upgraded to Windows 11, that you get that replaced before the end of life of the operating system, which is October 14th.
And with that, people can pay. They have to pay to continue getting support for that. Is that correct? If
Correct.
they
Yeah.
haven't made the change.
There's a fee every year. There was just a article that came out this morning that Microsoft, if you are in Europe, which I doubt very many of our listeners, but if you're coming to us from Europe, you have the opportunity to get a free update for another year for Windows 10. But for the rest of us that aren't in Europe, in the Europe Economic Zone, you have to either pay or upgrade to get that support.
And how do you help businesses plan it out so they're not having to replace everybody's laptop or desk computer at the same time?
Yeah, I like to cycle it. If you let's say you have 20 computers in your business, um, and you have a life cycle of 5 years. I think that's a reasonable time frame with hardware as it is. You just take 20 divided by 5, and every year you're replacing 4 of your computers, and that's a good opportunity to cycle it through. We also recommend maybe taking one of your older computers and leaving it as a spare, but every year you're recycling your spares. So your newest computers that you're replacing are going to becoming, you'll have 1 or 2 spares. In case one of your computers dies, you have a piece of equipment that you can give to that employee while the other one's getting fixed. So I think, if you're replacing a quarter to a fifth of your computers every year, you don't have to worry as much about that. Like, okay, we got to replace all of them this year. That big hardware expense. And then servers, again, that life cycle of 5 to 7 years for the replacement of servers. You just look at that and make sure that you're staying on top of that as part of your life cycle.
And diving a little deeper into software now, we touched on it earlier on, but how do businesses really get in to see if their licenses are up to date and if they're especially if their software is up to date?
Yeah, this is a little bit more tricky as cloud software has become completely prevalent. So, buying Microsoft Office anymore or Adobe Pro or some of these licenses, you just don't buy retail copies of these anymore. You're buying subscriptions every month. So I recommend tracking your subscriptions. If you're interested, we have some recommendations for some software that can also track that. Um, but it really is important to track what subscriptions you have and ensure that you're getting the right subscription. So maybe last year you hired a graphic designer and you ordered them a copy of Adobe Creative Cloud so that they had that license, but maybe they're no longer with you and you are still paying for that subscription. It could cost you hundreds of dollars a year per employee to have licenses that you're not using. So tracking that is a big cost savings for the company, so that you can quickly eliminate those licenses. A lot of the licenses require a 1-year commit, even if you're paying for it monthly. So it's important to know the dates that those commitments happen, and you can cancel them before they auto renew. So just have your accounting staff or administrative staff create a spreadsheet so you can track those licenses and who they're assigned to, and you can cancel them when those employees leave.
Oh, do a lot of these licenses automatically renew? You have to really pay attention to the dates.
Oh yeah, yeah. Evergreen is a big part of it. And if you don't, some of the licenses you have to cancel it 30 days in advance, else it renews automatically. So you got to make sure that you're well on top of those renewal dates. Having that, part of it, you know, y- often if you cancel it, you get to still use the software until the end of, that term. But making sure that you're canceling it as soon as you know that you don't need it anymore.
How do they know if they're up to date on like the latest technology? Is this a good time to kind of think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different aspects to that question. So, latest technology, obviously operating systems, your main line of business applications, that's a part of it. But there's a lot of other technologies out there that advance, especially in what we call line of business applications. So, software that's specifically related to the industry you work in. So if you're a CPA firm, you're buying software to do your tax preparation, your audits, and there may be new software that's coming out that might be better. And so I recommend going to industry conferences, looking at what software is out there, talking to the different software vendors, and seeing what new things are coming out. Lot of software vendors are incorporating automation and AI technologies that if you have a legacy software, they may not be incorporated. So you might have a new and up and coming player that has many more features and capabilities than your older vendors. So stay on top of that. As an IT provider, it's hard for us to know exactly what's out there in every one of the industries. So, really see what's going on in your industry, and we can help you analyze, the software and what it will take to get it implemented. But your features of the software you want and need better than we do, and we can assist you in the analysis and the deployment. But stay on top of it, especially at industry conferences. So that's where those software vendors will go and show you all the new stuff that they're working on.
Right, and looking ahead to 2026 to kind of wrap this up for compliance, how do we keep on top of knowing what might be changing in the next year?
Yeah, there's always compliance changes that are going on. So whether you're like a defensive Department of Defense contractor, CMMC is becoming a requirement. There's all kinds of changes to framework that are continuing to happen. So really have to work with a professional to figure out what, from a compliance standpoint, you need to do going forward. The other thing we also kind of lump insurance into compliance because insurance companies are on their renewals are making companies implement more cybersecurity measures than they ever have. And so it's a good time as you're going through renewals, maybe at the end of the year with your insurance provider, to look at what policies you have in place and ensure that you have all the tools and systems implemented so that if something does happen, that your insurance company will back you up, will pay out on the claim and help you through some type of disaster. So I would say add that to your end of year checklist as insurance, and that will, definitely help you quite a bit as you move forward into the new year.
And the last question, as a technology company, what are we preparing for in the next year and what are we looking forward to?
So we do a lot of the same things. I mentioned software vendors. We analyze our vendors that we use to deploy our systems every year, and we have made a number of changes over the last few years because there's new technologies out there, new partners that are better than our old ones. So that's one of the things that we often do. Um, we're we're knee deep in a big deployment at Stimulus Technologies right now, moving from our fixed wireless on our internet services side over to a fiber provider. And we're analyzing different vendors, different technologies, and making a lot of decisions on how we're going to effectively deploy this new generation of technology that we'll be bringing to our clients. So that's one thing that we're heavily deep in, is the analysis of our entire deployment and understanding how that's going to work. So, we practice a bit of what we preach, or we practice all of what we preach here. That we're constantly looking at our vendors, looking at our systems, and ensuring that we have the best technology that we can deliver to our clients. And end of year is a time that we do a lot of that work. We have quite a few things on our rocks. If you're EOS, you're familiar with rocks and goals, about making sure that we have the capabilities of delivering the services that we intend to over the next. We're looking out 3 to 5 years now with our deployments. So just an interesting time for us as we're moving forward into the new year.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. And I can't believe we didn't talk about AI. I'm sure it'll be coming up in one of our other episodes, but
Well, I mentioned it once, I guess,
that's true.
as
That's true.
software. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so, yeah, we'll be talking more about, how to prepare for the future and some of our upcoming episodes. And thank you, Nathan. Thanks everybody for listening.